Hey everyone, and welcome back for session number 4. So a quick recap of what we've covered so far in the previous 3 sessions is session number 1 we did Tuesday last week. We spoke about the ITDR capabilities from the sort of introduction perspective, what ITDR is, and then we spoke about prevention. We then spoke about the detection capabilities on Wednesday last week. Yesterday, we went into investigation and hunting, and we're going to finish today with response, which is the last pillar of our ITDR capabilities. So there's a couple of things we want to talk about today. There's a couple of areas of response which are interesting for us from a identity-specific response, a manual response action, as well as the attack disruption capability we have, which is part of the wider XDR capabilities as well, and how the identity platform plays a big part of that. So let's get going then. Session number 4. We have a number of response actions that we can trigger manually on a user account directly from the Defender portal. So we can do this from multiple different places within the portal. I think I've mentioned already, we're really trying to build our product to be efficient for security analysts. We want to surface up the capabilities at various different areas where they make sense in the different surfaces of the product. We want to surface them up where they make sense. But ultimately, we have a number of response actions that we can kick against a user account, similar to what you would do from an EDR perspective, I guess, if you're familiar with the capabilities you might have there to isolate a device or run a malware scan. We want to have an analogous capabilities on the user side that we can use to contain a particular account or to force like a password reset. So there's a number of today there's a number of supported scenarios we have from a response point of view. We have disable or enable user. Actually, there's two, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit. There's 2 ways we can disable a user, both on-prem and in the cloud, and I'll explain the differences and how we've built our products around that. We also have the force password reset response action as well. And then confirm user compromised is a special action where we can go back to Entra, and we've spoken a little bit already about our vision, I guess, of ITDR coming together, the IAM and XDR platform. Well, with this confirm user compromised action, we can actually go back to Entra and then force the user's risk to be at high, and then go and trigger off the back of that maybe some conditional access policies that the Entra and identity and access management teams might have, and I'll explain that a little bit as well. And then lastly, we've got this action which is require user to sign in again, which effectively terminates, from a cloud perspective, terminates the tokens associated with that user. So these are all native actions. They're all built in directly into the, as I mentioned, the surfaces of the product. And there's various different places in the product you can fire them off from. The main page obviously would be the users page, and if I navigate to the users entity page, I can click on the top right here, and I get a drop down of actions. And I'll show you this in the portal in a little bit more detail as we go through. So just talking a little bit about the response action to disable a user account. Now, one thing that a lot of products do, or a lot of identity vendors will do, is suspend an account in Entra ID, which is a good way to contain a cloud-based account from accessing different cloud-based services. But the problem is that Entra Connect will come along 30 minutes later, or if you're running Cloud Sync, maybe 10 minutes later. And then if the account isn't disabled on-prem, that disablement of the account effectively gets synced back up to the Entra ID instance, and the cloud account is unlocked. So when we're disabling an account, we need to make sure we're disabling it at the source, whether that is on-prem, if it's an on-prem sourced account and then replicated up to Entra through Entra Connect, or we need the ability to be able to suspend the account in Entra if it's a cloud only account. And we support both of those actions, right? So we can do it within Entra as a suspend action if it's a cloud only account, or if it's an on-prem account, then actually what we will do is through the Defender XDR service, we will like send the request down, so to speak, to the Active Directory on premises, and we do that through our Microsoft Defender for Identity sensor that sits on the DC. Now, the requirements for this to work is just as simple as you have MDI deployed on the domain controller. So if MDI is deployed on the domain controllers, as we spoke about in the previous sessions, and it's collecting the telemetry, one of the things that it will also do is enable us to perform that disable action. There's no other hard requirements for this, which is quite nice. We used to have a requirement where it required a separate managed service account to be able to do the action, but we've actually changed the architecture a little bit now, and you don't require that managed service account anymore. It's not a prerequisite. You can still configure it that way, but it's not mandatory that you do so, which sort of removes a little bit of the barriers in terms of getting this to operate effectively. Also, you don't require, or we don't require, any inbound access to the domain controllers to be able to perform this action. So the Microsoft Defender for Identity sensor is making an outbound connection already to the Defender XDR cloud, or the MDI cloud, and by extension Defender XDR. And that outbound connection, we're basically leveraging that outbound connection to be able to drop that response action, so it's then consumed on the sensor on the DC. So when you click disable user against a user object within the Defender portal, that signal is then captured and then actioned on the domain controller directly. The user account is disabled there, and if you've got Entra Connect, that disablement will then synchronize up to the cloud instance within 10 or 30 minutes, depending on what your configuration is, and then the account will be disabled there. We can, depending on what the response warrants in terms of the pervasiveness of the issue, what you might do is you might trigger a disablement action to on-prem and then also do a suspend action straight away against Entra, so that the account is effectively disabled in both places at the same time. So we can do both of those things that directly from the portal. Now, the other action we have is to force a password reset as well. And the way that works is we use this same architecture effectively, and the force password reset response action is going to the account in the on-premises Active Directory, and it's setting the change password at next logon attribute for that user. So when the user then goes to log into that account, they will need to enter their old password and then their new password to be able to change it. Now, this is a good way to mitigate an incident where a derived credential for that user has been stolen. So maybe like a password hash has been stolen. So that password hash might be that password hash might be stolen from memory, let's say, on a machine, but the attacker might not have the password in that instance, right? They would only have the derived credential, which means that the forced password reset option would be something that's applicable in this instance to contain that credential. And you could also, if you wanted to, enforce it with the disable action as well.
Chris.
So, Heike, the question?
Yes, so there's a few questions. Let's see.
Oh, a few questions. Okay, let's go.
Yes. I will start with the first question, which was, are you also going to cover any integrations with non-Microsoft IGA tools, like SailPoint Identity Now being used as the authoritative source for identities? Or tell me if the answer is in the recording of one of the previous sessions, or is there something that you can point Duncan to?
So we haven't got anything publicly to announce on that, and unfortunately this is a public webinar, so we can't ascertain NDAs, etc. So for that type of information, I think joining the CCP channel would be the best route to get any information on that. Yeah.
Perfect. Then not follow up, but also from Duncan, we have that approach with separate GMSAs for the sensor and for the action account. Are you saying that action account is no longer required?
Yes, ultimately that's what I'm saying.
Okay. Then response actions, what permissions are required to perform these actions?
Okay, so that I guess means permissions within the XDR portal. So there is an RBAC. Well, there's two permissions that might be referred to here. One is the permission of the actual managed account on-prem that's performing the actual response action. Now we don't require the managed service account anymore, which effectively we're running under the context of the domain controller. So there's no requirement to delegate any permissions for the actual action to be perpetrated on the DC itself, right? Now, if you're running the managed service account option, there were permissions that needed to be delegated. That's in the docs. But I think actually probably what's been referred to here is what RBAC permissions are required to trigger as an analyst to trigger the response action. That permission is actually in our unified RBAC capability. Off the top of my head, I couldn't tell you. I can maybe go into the portal when we have a look in a minute and try and dig it out. And doing this stuff live is always quite fun, right? But I think there's a specific RBAC option for that for sure.
Cool. So 2 more questions. Maybe there's more coming, but let's focus on 2 more and then continue. How long does it take for user disable action via MDI to trigger? Seconds, minutes, hours? And does the user's cloud object get triggered at the same time, or are there separate actions?
So I'll answer the last part first. They are today 2 separate actions. So you would do them both separately, or you could do them at the same time, I guess. And then the first part of the question was how long does it take? In my experience, and I guess it's going to depend on networking in an organization, but in my experience, it's generally less than 1 minute. So when you click the button to disable the user, within about 30 to 90 seconds, thereabouts on average, that action is going to be taken on the domain controller, and then the user account will be disabled there. Now, what that's going to do is that's going to prevent that user account from obtaining any new Kerberos tickets or anything which could then be used to almost contain lateral movement, right?
Yeah. And I think also when you go into the demo, you can probably show the button, and then they see it as for the cloud object as well as the on-prem object. So, and then there was the other question. If we use a federated ISP Okta and we have the Okta connector and MDI, does force password reset trigger the Okta password reset flow? Oof.
No. If Okta are replicating in the user status from Active Directory on-prem into their service, I don't know Okta, so I'm just sort of saying how it might work. If Okta are taking the status of the user as being enabled or disabled and then syncing that into their service, then yes, it would. But we're not doing anything directly in Okta ourselves, right? That's not something that's there.
Oh my goodness, Chris, there's like 6 more questions and they just keep coming in. Let me know, do you want to continue for now and maybe some of the questions clarify? Or do you want me to go ask more questions?
Let's do a couple more questions. I think we've got time.
Okay. So which kind of role required for force password reset?
So again, that's going to be on the RBAC permission, isn't it? What I would say is unified RBAC. I don't know if that's the official name of it, but it is the RBAC capabilities within Defender 365. There is a specific RBAC permission for this. What I'll do is I'll go into the portal and I'll try and off the top of my head tell you which one it is within there, so I can have a quick look at that if we go through.
Good. So Josh says the force reset to on-prem doesn't work well. Is there any plan to have a force reset process similar to risky users where it directs the user to re-authenticate and reset automatically?
Yeah, so I think what's been referred to there is within Entra, there's a password reset workflow from conditional access. So again, I haven't got anything to share publicly on anything related to that right now.
Okay. Will this also terminate any active sessions and active token and Entra ID? No, I think you answered that question, right?
Yeah. So there is a if I just go back a slide, there is a where is it? Yeah.
And we will also get to it, right, when we talk about attack disruption.
Yeah, so we can refer to it in attack disruption. There's also this action here, which is require user to sign in again. That's going to go to Entra and then purge all of the tokens in Entra for that user, the access tokens and such. Now that's it's kind of worms to open, I would say, because the hierarchy of tokens and where they're cached and how long they can be used for is a complicated thing to get into. But ultimately, there is a way to go and revoke those tokens on the Entra side, and this is the way to do it. Whether that takes effect immediately depends on a number of different factors.
Okay, perfect. And then what are the options in Defender XDR for outbreak containment rather than response on a single system?
We're going to talk about that in attack disruption.
Good.
Spoiler.
And then, when user account in on-prem sync to Entra ID, when I disable user account and enable user account in Entra ID, does it populate to the user account on-prem? Also, what happened to a disabled account when service desk perform password reset in Entra? Does it enable the account?
Not sure I fully understand that question, if I'm honest.
So I think if you have enabled the sync from on-prem to Entra ID, so if you disable a user and enable the user in Entra ID, if it also does the same, then synchronize it to the on-prem world.
Yeah, so the synchronization is today is one way, right? So the source of authority is Active Directory, so that's what takes precedence. That is how it is today. I don't know, about the future what that might look like, but today the source of authority, if you've got Entra Connect, will be the on-prem. Active Directory would be the precedent. Yeah.
And the second part was, so if you have an account disabled and then someone, the service desk, forces now a password reset, will this now enable the account again, that disabled account?
No, and this is a good point actually, because if the let me just get this right in my head. So if the account is okay, so if the account is disabled, then the forced password reset will not re-enable the account. I think is the short of it. But there's also a caveat that I should mention here as well, that if the account has what's the setting now? If the account has there's a setting that you can have on the account. I can't think of it off the top of my head, which is basically makes the password. You don't have to change the password. I can't remember what the setting's called. If that setting is configured, I'll dig out what it is. Then the forced password reset option doesn't actually take, because there is a requirement to make sure that the password can be changed. So if the account is configured that the password can't be changed, then obviously that's not going to take effect. But I'll have to dig out what the specific setting is. It's in the docs as well. So
for now, the last one. Is session revocation different, separate from require sign in again, or is it arose by another name? Sweet.
Yeah, as far as I understand, and I'm not the arbiter of all of the information in the world on this, but as far as I understand, the require user to sign in again option is basically triggering the Entra revoke session workflow. As far as I understand, that is the case. So yes, it's the same thing by a different name. There might be some nuance to that in terms of the exact details of it, but that's the way that I understand it. Yes.
Great. So for now, let's go.
Okay.
New questions
Perfect.
will come, and then I will let you know when there's more. Thank you.
Perfect. That was great. That was great, Heike. We had some great questions there. Okay, so the other thing then is conditional access. Again, this isn't a webinar on Entra ID and conditional access specifically, but what is interesting for us to know and understand is how we can influence conditional access from the Defender XDR portal. So conditional access, if you're not familiar, is Entra's way of doing adaptive authentication to applications that are protected by or federated to, I should say, Entra itself. So typically that's going to be Office 365. It's going to be any cloud applications that you might be using. You might be using some third-party apps there which are using Entra as an IDP. You might have your own custom applications, web applications that you've built. And, with the application proxy, you might have some on-premises web-based applications that are also included in conditional access or Entra ID scope as well. Now with Entra ID private access, which is a new capability, which is out there for you to test today, we can actually extend some of this visibility of applications to on-prem apps as well. Now the reason I say that is because from a response point of view, if we can influence conditional access to apply to any app anywhere, whether it's in the cloud or on-prem, then that's quite a powerful response action that we can trigger. So the way that this works is you would have a response action. We have a response action which is confirm user compromised. When you check that option within the Defender portal, it's going to go back to Entra and it's going to set that user's risk to high. You can then have a conditional access policy as sort of shown here, which has a condition, which is the user risk. If the user risk is high, and the user's connecting to this application, it could be all apps, but it could be this specific application, then we are going to do this particular action. So the action that we're going to trigger is basically the access control mechanism that's in the CA policy here. Slightly old screenshot, the UI has changed a little bit, but the flow still holds the same. So effectively we're looking at that user's sign in, whether it's to a cloud app or by extension now through private access to the on-premises apps. And if they are at meet this bar where their risk is high, we can do, broadly speaking, one of these actions here. We can allow the access. Well, you're not going to do that if the user's at high risk, right? The whole point is we want to block. So we'll do some sort of block action. We will maybe require MFA. That's another thing that we could do in this instance for particular apps. And we can even do things as granular in conditional access as require fish resistant MFA. So there's different response capabilities we have within CA that we can trigger. So ultimately what we're talking about here is how can the security analyst and the SOC team influence the access policy that's assigned to a user by triggering this response action. And the reason I say it that way is because in most customers that I work with, and I think this is an important thing to talk about, in most customers that I talk with, the identity and access management teams are responsible for all of the access governance and the access policy. So they control MFA rollout, they control who gets MFA, where MFA is applied, all of those things. And the security team are responsible for detecting security incidents and responding to those security incidents. The security team typically are not responsible, in most customers, it's a generalization, but most customers I talk to are not responsible or shouldn't have capability to define access policy within their product or their tool, right? However, there should be a relationship between those two things or those two tools from a technical point of view where one can influence the other. And the influence we're talking about here is, if I'm concerned that a user is compromised, I can mark them as such, and then the identity and access management team will have a bunch of CA policies they've already defined for tier 0 applications, tier 1 applications, sensitive applications, etc. And they can, by extension of that CA policy, enforce blocking or whatever the case might be. So that's how we sort of see this from a Microsoft perspective, is bringing together the IAM team and the security operations team on the same journey. Hopefully that makes sense. Any other quick questions, Heike, before I get to the demo? It's been quite active on the questions, so I want to make sure I get through them.
You won't believe it, there is 0 questions right now.
Okay,
so
perfect. So I'll switch over to a quick demo just to show you where this stuff is. So there's a few different places that we can access these response actions, and I just want to show you a couple of the places, just how they surface up within the flow, if you will, of how you might be using the tool. So if I go back into, I think yesterday we were talking about the incident in here. I'll just minimize that a second. Let's let it load. So we spoke about, I'll make sure I get the right incident actually. I'm in the right, yeah, I'm in the right place. It was this one here actually. Okay, yeah, so this is the incident we were looking at yesterday. And I'm not going to go into all the investigation flow that we went into yesterday. But if I'm going through as I was yesterday, then I can click, I can click certain detections here, and that's going to highlight the detection in the bottom. But you can see I've actually got, if I zoom in, I've actually got the user, and this is the user we were talking about yesterday, Sonia, who's listed here. So I can actually click the user there and then click the user details. And what that's going to do within this sort of UI is actually bring up that that user's page here. Now it's a little bit compressed in this view here because I've got a small resolution on the screen to adapt for the webinar. So on your normal screen it'll be a lot larger. But you can see here I've got all of the details that we were looking at yesterday for this user. We've got the observed in organization, the metadata of the user, and all of those things that were interesting for us, the investigation priority, etc. Now what you probably don't realize or can't ascertain from this small screen real estate here is we've got this more actions button there with the 3 dots. 3 dots always leads to goodness. It's the breadcrumbs to really interesting things, and the really interesting things that we've got are all of those response actions that we were talking about a second ago. So I can confirm the user is compromised in here. And again, just to confirm, what that's going to do is it's going to go back to Entra. It's going to set that user's risk to high, and then any CA policies that are defined are going to take effect for that user, depending on what application that user is connecting to. So it's a really great way to sort of influence access decisions in a real-time way. It takes, in my experience, because we had this question about the disable user before, about 2 to 2.5 minutes, maybe 3 minutes tops, for that to take effect and be represented in the Entra portal. If you go into Entra, you'll see that the user is at risk, and then you'll see that the user is at risk because they were confirmed as compromised by an administrator. So you'll see all of that in there. We have suspend user in Azure AD. It should be Entra. The UI has not been updated yet, but if you click on there, it will give you a bit of information about what it's going to do. So you can see here it's going to suspend the user in Entra, and it's going to tell you what's going to happen when you do that. We also have the option to disable the user in AD, and again it's going to tell you here this is what we're going to do from an Active Directory point of view. And then again, if I click that, it's going to go back to the on-prem AD, and it's going to mark the user as disabled in Active Directory there. And we can also from here enable the user in AD as well. So maybe I triggered the disablement action by accident. I can then reverse that action. There's another way you can reverse it actually, which I'll show you, which probably makes more sense. But it might be a case that the risk has been mitigated and contained, so to speak, that you actually want to then re-enable the user, because disabling the user is going to mean they can't then do any of the they can't request access to new things from that point forward, right? It's going to terminate their access going forwards, which is a pretty it's a pretty significant response action to perform against the user, right? So we can re-enable the user there. Require the user to sign in again. Again, that's going to go and trigger that Entra action to revoke the tokens. And then we've got force password reset as well, which goes and marks that user as password change at next logon, as I specified before. There's a bunch of other sort of miscellaneous things in here which aren't directly related to the response actions that we're talking about, and it depends whether you've got Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps deployed. Predominantly, we can look at things like the owned files of the user. We can look at shared files and stuff. All of that's coming from Defender for Cloud Apps, which might be interesting as part of an investigation. You might want to see this user's been compromised. Actually, what files have they got access to? That's going to be interesting from an investigation point of view. They're not like response actions that would fall in the typical SOC response action, but they might be interesting from a sort of peripheral point of view. So
I have questions for you.
Okay, let's go.
So James has less options than you in that user action menu. So for example, suspend in Azure AD isn't there. Where do we enable all of the options that you can see, please? Okay, so there's 2 reasons, at least that I'm aware of, why those options might not be available. The first one is you haven't got
a part of the product stack deployed that would open up that capability. So if you haven't got MDI deployed, then you might not see some of these disablement actions as an example. Some of these are coming from Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps, which is suspend user and require user to sign in again, I think come via Defender for Cloud Apps. So it could be that that part of the stack isn't deployed, or the other reason might be that you haven't got the required permissions. Now that is a little bit nuanced. There is a docs page which has all of this laid out in terms of what permissions are required. And what I can do is I can try and dig out that link to the docs page with the permissions mappings. So it could be that you haven't got the right permission or the right scope within your role to get that. That's generally the two reasons why.
Okay, thank you. So then what is the difference in suspending and disabling user account in Entra ID?
Yeah, so just to be clear on these two actions, this one here is doing it on-prem. So that's going to go back to the on-prem Active Directory and trigger the disablement action there. And this one here is suspend user. It's effectively disable the user in Entra ID. Now, if you remember, we were talking from the disablement slide earlier on, we have the two actions here, because if I just do it against the cloud account, then Entra Connect will come along 30 minutes later and then override that. So we want to be able to do it in the on-prem directory, which is what that one is there. So like it depends on if the user's a cloud-only account or not, will depend on which one is the best one to trigger. Or you might trigger both. If it's something you want to take immediate effect in both on-prem and the cloud, there's nothing stopping you from triggering both actions.
Okay. So then is there a master list anywhere that provides us information about how long we should expect various inter-system actions to take? I don't know if we have a doc page that also points this out.
I don't think we have that level of detail in the docs, but yeah, if that's an ask of like how long these response actions should take in a typical environment, I can ask the team to see if that's something we can look at. But I don't think
so.
It's...
Can maybe write a blog post about it or something, or put it in docs.
Yeah, something like that.
I like it. So what is the difference with revoking session and require user to sign in again? Seems the same for me, but needed to confirm from expert. That's you.
Yeah, so I think that's what we spoke about before. My understanding is it's effectively the same thing. There might be a little bit of nuance in that between how it's shown here and what Entra's doing, but my understanding is it's the same thing. Yeah.
Okay, so then will we cover action from email collaboration explorer? No. Good.
Unfortunately not. That's I mean, it is in the XDR purview, but it's not something we're going to cover today.
Okay, but also for everyone, there's at the very end, we will share a link. I think we also shared it at the beginning for feedback, because we're actually planning to cover our POC as a service, these kind of webinars for our other Defender products. So I think Defender for Cloud Apps, also Defender for Office 365. So then probably these actions will be shown there. So if you are interested in these topics, please submit them in the feedback, because this is what we read and where we can get the content for you together. Good. So, and then another one was, is there any option to disable the session for a compromised user?
So that could have two meanings, I guess. So the session from an on-prem perspective and the session from a cloud perspective. So the session from a cloud perspective would be require a user to sign in again, which would terminate the tokens. But as I said, there's quite a lot of nuance to the hierarchy of tokens that are used in modern authentication and where they're cached and how they're used. So just because you revoke the tokens doesn't mean that user's access is going to be terminated immediately. There could be a delay. Now that's a much larger topic than we have time to cover today, unfortunately. Now the other part would be, how can we terminate sessions in an on-prem environment? And we don't have any way to do that, unfortunately, with the tooling that we have. The only way to really affect that would be to purge the Kerberos tickets on a machine, and that's not in the product today. It's not anything that we have capability for, but that's the way it would be done, right? Is purging the Kerberos tickets.
Perfect. Thank you. For now, that's it.
Okay. What I'll do then is I'll flick over to attack disruption actually, and then we'll spend a little bit of time on that, and then I want to wrap up at the end with some best practices as well. So I'll just flick back to the slides for 1 second. So I think we had a question on this as well in terms of containment. Attack disruption is a set of capabilities we have at the XDR level, which allow us to intervene into an ongoing attack at machine speed and disrupt that attack before that attack plays out to full fruition. So what we mean by that is it's not we see an incident and the incident's played out and then we trigger some response actions as like a SOAR playbook afterwards to go and disable some accounts and clean up. What we're actually doing is we're intervening into the attack during the actual progression of the attack to stop the attack from actually playing out fully. And we do that based on high confidence cross workload signals, which I'll explain what that means in a second. But before we get there, let's talk a little bit at the minute in terms of this. This is a slide that my colleague and friend put together, which I'm reusing from him because I think it sort of explains the concepts quite nicely in terms of where attack disruption will fit. So what are the different ways that we have as a security analyst to be able to respond to an ongoing attack? Well, first and foremost, we have prevention. We can prevent an attack from playing out in the first place. And the way that we can do that is through your typical antivirus. The antivirus signatures are going to stop malware X from running. We've got web application gateways which can restrict access to malicious websites, email gateways that will stop the emails coming in. Now, from a time perspective, those things are at the very beginning of the attack, right? Because they're stopping the attack from happening in the first place. And the false positive ratio is generally quite low. These things are good signal to noise ratio. They're closing down most commodity attacks before they become an issue. So most of the sort of grunt work from a prevention point of view is sits with those types of capabilities. Then the next sort of thing we have is block or behavior blocking. So this is where we have something that's maybe a piece of polymorphic malware or a piece of malware which we haven't seen before. We're having to block that based on behavioral signals and machine learning and stuff, rather than it being prevented outright using heuristics or some type of signature. So things like sandboxing, things like even conditional access with MFA, how we can apply that in an authorization way when a user, we've seen a signal from a user and we're going to block access or apply MFA. These things are generally done a little bit further down the attack chain, so to speak, but still at the beginning. They may have a slightly higher FP ratio, particularly if you're using ML and behavioral based blocking. That's based on statistics, right? And how confident or not we are that this is malicious. It's not based on exact signatures of executables or things that we're looking at. So it's a little bit more dynamic, let's say, in terms of how it works. But it can, you can tune that, of course. You can make ML models be more aggressive, which means that they will block more things and prevent attacks from being perpetrated further, but your FP ratio is going to go up with that as well. So it's always a balance between what we what we can block as behavioral blocking and what the FP ratio of that is. So the next thing then would be how we create automated response to alerts. And we're talking typically here about SOAR playbooks. This is used extensively by security operations teams. You might have a SOAR platform that you use today, whether that's in Sentinel or something else. And generally, the way that these things work is you see detection X, Y, and Z, and then you trigger this playbook based on that detection. And that playbook can be very aggressive in the sense that you might have it tuned such as you see an atypical travel alert, you're going to go and disable the user. Well, that's going to be aggressive. It's going to shut down any potential attacks, but it's going to have a significant FP ratio, and it's going to have high business impact in terms of what it's going to do to your environment, so to speak. Because if you start blocking all of the users across your environment because they've got atypical travel alerts, that's probably going to have, you know, a high degree of impact on your business. Or on the flip side of it, it might be too soft, right? Whereby it's not aggressive enough, but then there's not a huge amount of security value there, because if it's not aggressive enough, then actually an attack might have had time to fully play out, and then by that time you've already been compromised, ransomware has been deployed, and it's too late. So that automation playbook is really difficult balance that you have to make, you know, when you're creating these playbooks. And then what you have, and I guess it's what we were just talking about a second ago, is like a manual response action that you can trigger during a human-led investigation. Now that can be automated, and we have some capabilities in Defender today to help with that, with the automatic investigation and response. But generally that's coming like after the fact, right? So the incident has played out to some extent, and then we're coming in to collect evidence of that incident, and then we're either going to go and, you know, quarantine a file, or we're going to go and disable a user. It's got a very, very, very high signal to noise ratio, because you know, it's something that's being applied with a laser focus, but it might be too slow in terms of preventing attacks, right? So these are some of the challenges that we have today with some of the response type things that we have within, you know, various different products that you might have deployed. So what we've done at Microsoft is we've come up with this concept of attack disruption. So first and foremost, and we've spoken about incidents already, attack disruption is based on those high fidelity cross workload signals. So what we're talking about here is we have our XDR services, or the pillars of the XDR, deployed to protect the different areas of your environment. So your devices with EDR, your identities we've been talking about with the ITDR capabilities, mailboxes with Defender for Office, etc. So we're going to collect all of that telemetry, all of that signal from all of those different sources. And we're going to bring that signal into our data store effectively, and we're going to profile that, we're going to understand it, we're going to build visibility across that data. And then what we're going to do is we're going to look at the behaviors that are happening across the environment, and those behaviors, there's going to be some alerts for sure that are going to get fired, but we're also looking at particular patterns of behavior as well. So actually, if you think about like an adversary in the middle, we spoke about that incident previously, then you know, with an adversary in the middle, like stealing a user's token and then using token replay, and then through the token replay, you know, ultimately bypassing the MFA claims with that replay, and then getting access to a user's account to create an inbox forwarding rule, and so on and so forth. These are particular types of behaviors that we see that might indicate that the attack is a real attack and is playing out. That's just one example. There's multiple different examples that we might draw down upon. Ransomware is another one where, you know, the attacker is, you know, performing some sort of lateral movement, privilege escalation, and then starting to use particular endpoints to spread malware. So these are all signals that we're collecting and behaviors that we're analyzing in real time across the XDR platform as they're playing out. And then, of course, there's going to be certain alerts that get generated from these different platforms as well. And our XDR engine is doing all that correlation goodness that we spoke about. It's creating the kill chain stages and mapping. It's looking at the scope of the impacted assets and all of that sort of stuff. And then what's going to happen is we're going to get our sort of XDR engine is going to look at all of these behaviors as they're playing out in real time. And where we've got a high confidence that there is a particular type of attack playing out, whether it's like human operated ransomware or adversary in the middle, we're going to then create a specific alert which is targeted at that type of incident. And then we're going to, we're then going to trigger, I'll just build this slide out a little bit. We're going to trigger a very specific set of containment actions, and I use the word containment rather than response, because we're going to contain the adversary before they can manage to continue on their journey of deploying ransomware or whatever the case might be. So taking all of that incident correlation from the multiple different sources with detecting that the attack is real with high confidence. And when I say high confidence, and I think the statistic is like 99.99% or 99.9% confidence that it's a user is compromised or a device is spreading ransomware, we're going to automatically contain that specific threat by issuing a set of actions to stop that attack. So the action might be disable the user, which then prevents further new sessions from being created for that user. And we just spoke about user disablement. It might be to contain a device if it's on the EDR side, or contain an IP address. So there's different things that we can do from that perspective to stop an attack from being fully perpetrated. So I'm going to just flick over to a demo very quickly just to show you what it looks like. Of course, it's signed me out, so let it sign me in again. I'm just going to set the tags here and then set this to, just make sure I get the right incident. Attack disruption. I think we've got a ransomware one here. There's a BEC one and a ransomware one. Maybe this one, I think. So this is a ransomware incident that's played out within this environment, and you can see here how attack disruption is surfacing itself in the UI. So we've got this note at the top here. We're telling you attack disruption has automatically taken a set of actions in this environment, and you can go to the action center, and I'll show you that in a second where all the actions are. You can also see in the graph here that we've got this device here which is contained, and we've got two users. One out of the two users is actually disabled, which is this Ashley user here. So we've got visibility that the attack disruption has taken place. And again, we're not investigating the incident right now, but this is a typical ransomware style incident, human operated ransomware that's playing out in this environment. Now, if I go into the investigations here, this is where you can see the actions that have actually taken place. Now, you'll see the detection source is listed as Windows Defender Service. So Windows Defender Service is typically the automatic attack disruption. And you can see that 3 specific actions have taken place here. One is containing a user account suspected of spreading human operated ransomware. One is disabling a compromised user, and one is containing an unmanaged device. Now, an unmanaged device is a device that doesn't have the EDR on it. So it's a device that we've got no management purview over. However, we can contain that device by implementing restrictions on managed devices to prevent inbound communication. But just to look at what this looks like here, if I go into the actual investigation here, you can see that it's pretty straightforward. There's an alert was received. We triggered the response action to disable the user, and the result was that it was successful. And you can see that took 44 seconds for that response action to take, which is what we want, right? We want that response action to be at machine speed. I can see here that the alerts that were generated were this potentially compromised assets exhibiting ransomware-like behavior. So this is the XDR correlated alert that's fired, and you can see that the user was contained as being malicious or disabled as being malicious. And then I can see in the log here that the action taken was disable the user account in Active Directory. It may take a couple of minutes for this to take effect. See the action center there. So I'll just quickly show you the other user contain action. Oh, I went back too far then. And then I don't know if we've got any questions, Heike, but I'll just show this. If there's some questions, we'll cover those quickly. And then I just want to wrap up with some best practices as well. So I'll just quickly show this here. This one here, which is contain user. So again, this is a similar thing. You can see this one took 14 seconds to apply. We've received, I think it's the same alerts actually, potential compromised user account delivering ransomware related files. So this user was subject to a potential ransomware attack and was delivering ransomware across the organization. It's the same user we were just referring to. And you can see here in the log that it contains the user account by enforcing a policy that prevents or terminates remote activity initiated by this account. So effectively, we're preventing lateral movement of that account. So it's a very specific containment of that account. So we're not revoking the sessions of the account, but we're preventing that account from being used to move laterally across the network. And there's a little bit of nuance in terms of how that works. But yeah, that's sort of what we're doing there. So I think we're running a little bit tight up to time now. So I do want to make sure I cover any questions.
Okay.
And then maybe we can just wrap up some best practices.
I'm not sure, but I think we had this question already. What is the difference between suspending and disabling account in Azure AD?
Yeah, so we did have that one. So the disable account is doing it on-prem, and the suspend account is doing it in the cloud.
Thank you.
Effectively, it's the same thing, yeah.
Okay. I have been hearing Defender 365 Portal and Microsoft XDR interchangeable. Are these two the same? Yeah, this is name change. So yes, it is now Microsoft XDR, Microsoft Defender XDR, previously known as Microsoft 365 Defender. Yeah. Good. Relating to attack disruption, do I need to configure this? No, I will just answer is on by default. And hopefully you will never ever see it, but if it runs for you, you will have that little label that Chris showed. Attack disruption only kicks in for 3 threats. Are there options to customize? No, not customization yet. And also new playbooks or like new of these threats are coming all the time. So stay tuned for more additional automated attack disruption scenarios. So let's say if I log into our environment today and tomorrow I logged in the US and next day I logged into Asia during authentication, I was able to approve MFA challenge. Does Entra ID will block my access considering I met the MFA challenge authentication, but I travel every single day?
So that, I guess that depends on how you configured the service. So you might get an atypical travel alert within Entra because you're traveling, into different countries, and that might fire an alert. That might put your user at a low risk. From an Entra perspective, really, you don't want to configure it to take any CA-based policy actions, at least medium or higher, particularly high risk. So what might happen is if we see your travel across multiple different countries, and then there's other indicative behaviours of you being compromised, that might raise your overall risk. So it's not to be taken in isolation, I guess, is what I would say.
Okay, and then help me if I'm getting this right. So even when the account was disabled by attack disruption, is the session still valid, or will it revoke? So if I'm not mistaken, if there is Defender for Endpoint running with the new attack disruption evolution, it will disable the session, right?
It will contain the user, which is, I guess, semantics, but it's different. But effectively, it's the same thing, right? The contain user is going to prevent that user from accessing other machines on the network from a lateral movement perspective using specific protocols that would be used for lateral movement, but it's not revoking the sessions.
Perfect, thank you. And then is there a way determining session on-prem and isolate endpoint?
Say that again, sorry.
I'm trying. Is there a way? It's the unfortunately, Tony confused multiple characters in this one word, so that I'm trying to find it. So is there a way determining? I don't know. Let's go to the next one first. Tony, if you're still there, can you please ask the question again with the right word? Can I trigger an MFA prompt for your user?
No, and I say that like that because effectively the way that we would approach that is through confirm user compromised, which could have a policy action in CA to enforce MFA, but that's not like an on-demand MFA prompt, if that makes sense.
It's not a response action, basically, that's currently in the portal. Okay, cool. So no question. Let's see if Tony comes back. And I think you wanted to share some best practices. Take your time.
Yeah, I've only got 2 minutes. I'll put my camera on because I've got no other slides to share here. So I've got basically 5 things that you should consider if you're running a POC, particularly on Microsoft Defender for Identity, which is the core part of our ITDR platform. So number 1 is make sure that you've looked at the prerequisites for deployment. If you go into the security portal, and I think I showed this on day 1, in the identity section, you'll see there's a tools section, and in the tools section there's a PowerShell module that you can download that will help you configure the prerequisites, identify missing prerequisites. You should do that and make sure those prerequisites are in place, because the security value will be or could be hampered by not having the prerequisites in place. The second one is sizing. So make sure that you have checked the sizing of the domain controllers and you've got enough capacity there to support the MDI sensor. Of course, we're running code on the DC. That's going to take some amount of resources, so we need to make sure that we've got the required sizing there. Next is coverage. So if you're testing Microsoft Defender for Identity, then you may not want to deploy it across your entire environment in a POC. So think about the coverage that you want. At the very minimum, you should cover all domain controllers in a site and make sure that the machines you're testing are also in the same site. Because if you've got machines in different sites connecting to DCs that aren't covered, that's going to lead to a bit of a challenge in terms of that detection value and so on and so forth. So just think about the coverage. In a dev environment, it might be okay because you might just deploy everything across your entire dev environment. Lastly is, well, 2 more things, sorry, is alert threshold. So I mentioned this the other day. If you go into the alert threshold, which is in the advanced settings, there is an option now to specify recommended test mode. And if you specify recommended test mode, it will set all of the learning profiles and detection thresholds so you can get the best value out of the product. And lastly, network name resolution is pretty important to make sure that NNR is in place. And this is what we do as part of the POC as a service, is we make sure that we provide an environment which has got all of the things configured in the correct way, so that when you are testing, you can run some red team testing, etc., that you are getting the best POC experience. So once again, if you are interested in that, please reach out to your account teams if you have one, and they can orchestrate that for you as a service. So with that, I'd like to thank everyone for the last 4 sessions. We are now complete and done on the ITDR POC as a service series. So thanks, everyone.
Yes, and a big thank you to you, Chris, for preparing and then, of course, presenting and sharing all this great information with our community. So also thank you to all the questions that you answered, of course, even during a live webinar. To all the listeners still on the line, if you're someone who wishes to aid in the protection of the world from cyber threats and desire to have a say in shaping our strategies, blueprints, and recommendations, then we invite you to become a part of our security community. Together, we can make a global impact. So join us at aka.ms/security community. This is also where you will be notified about the upcoming webinars, events, and other announcements. Also, please take a minute, as mentioned before, submitting your webinar feedback at aka.ms/security webinar feedback. For those of you who may have additional questions on the topic we just covered or other product related questions, please feel free to raise them in our Microsoft Tech Community discussion space at aka.ms/mdi-community. Thank you all for being part of our community and for joining us on these webinars. We hope to see you next time. Goodbye.